What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Low Bar Bill Craig. He has a set of facts that should definitely convince skeptics. And the host specifically asks him, hey, what kind of points can we make to skeptics to make them believe that Jesus actually resurrected from the dead? And Low Bar Bill does not disappoint. He's got 5 historical facts that should convince us that Jesus resurrected. So I'm totally down to hear some new facts, because they've got to be new facts, right? There's no way that he's still bringing up the same old bullshit and saying that skeptics can be convinced of it. There's no way he's doing that, so get ready for some new fucking facts. So if you want to fuck around and find out if you're going to become a Christian because of these historical facts, then please stay tuned.
My faith came alive when I understood the historical, actual physical reasons for believing in Jesus. And your explanation of the reasonable, rational approach to understanding the resurrection and the reasons for believing in the resurrection really took my heart by storm. So I just would like to hear you talk through what reasons a skeptic has to consider belief in the empty tomb of Jesus.
Well, I gotta say, I had the exact opposite experience than this guy had, mainly meaning that like these historical facts that Bill Craig is going to be presenting here are some things that like convinced him of his faith or like made him believe even more deeply or whatnot. The times in which I started to believe even deeper in Jesus and God and become way more religious when I was growing up were times when I felt more emotionally attached. And I feel like if I had heard some of these arguments that some of these apologists make, like Bill Craig or Lee Strobel or J. Warner Wallace, Frank Turek, any of these guys, these supposed historical facts, like I feel like it would have made me deconvert sooner, because it's like when I emotionally believed in the faith, when I was committed to the faith and I was very deeply believing in it, like I'm telling you guys, I was moved to tears and shit. I mean, I felt so emotionally attached to it. I know that some people out there, some apologists would be like, you were never a Christian. It's like, well, that's bullshit. Go fuck off is what I would say. But when I was deeply believing, if I had heard some of the bullshit evidence that we have for believing in this shit, other than just emotional reasons, I would have definitely been like, something smells fucky here. I'm just gonna see myself out. As soon as I started looking into the actual evidence, that's exactly what happened. So I'm gonna have the exact opposite effect for anything that Low Bar Bill has to say. And I'm not saying that as like I'm predisposed to like reject anything that Bill Craig is gonna say. I just have listened to Bill Craig a lot. I bet you I can guess what he's gonna say are the historical facts that prove an empty tomb or that Jesus was resurrected. And none of them are fantastical and none of them are new, but I'm here. I'm giving it a chance. That's the point here. I'm giving it a fucking chance. I'm listening to what he's got to say to see if he has anything new to say. Let's see what he's got.
Yes, I did my doctoral work in theology at the University of Munich in Germany on the historicity of Jesus' resurrection. And although at that time as a Christian, I believed Jesus rose from the dead, I frankly had no idea of how firm the historical credentials for that event are.
They are not firm. These quote unquote historical facts are flaccid as shit. These are flaccid facts. Flaccid facts with Bill Craig.
There are 5 facts that are widely agreed upon by the majority of New Testament historians today, whether conservative or liberal, Christian or non-Christian.
Right.
Well, so the amount of New Testament historians that are not religiously committed to the faith, you could probably number on your hands. The majority of New Testament historians, or scholars rather, which, it's kind of a stretch to say historians, because they're just sort of tangentially trained in history. Like they're not trained in actual historical research. They're trained to defend the faith. And that's what New Testament scholarship and biblical scholarship has been from the beginning, is how can we train these people to defend the faith from criticism? And This is widely acknowledged in the field that it definitely started that way and has continued to be that. Saying that, oh, New Testament scholars, regardless of their persuasion, agree with these facts is a bit misleading, because you can agree that these are historical facts, but we can disagree with what those facts mean. What arguments can you make from these facts? And that little bit of nuance is where the disagreement lies. And I feel like Low Bar Bill here is going to say the exact same shit that like either Michael Licona or Gary Habermas are going to say. And that's my bet, that every single argument that he picks is going to be a Habermas Licona type of argument.
And these would include that Jesus of Nazareth died by Roman crucifixion for claiming to be king of the Jews.
This right here is not a historical fact. Now, if a Jesus were to have existed, would he have been crucified by the Romans? I mean, I think that that's an inference that we can make, but we have to make a number of ad hoc assumptions. I mean, obviously, I'm a mythicist, so the whole idea of Jesus existing in the first place is something that you have to establish. But I'm perfectly fine with assuming that Jesus existed. The point that I'm wanting to make here is that we don't have direct evidence that Jesus was actually crucified by the Romans. It's a strong inference that we can make, but we have to assume a lot of things in order to get to that inference. And that's where I have a problem with it. But even so, let's just take this as face value. Like, yes, this is a historical fact. There was a Jesus and he was crucified by the Romans. What does this mean for a bodily resurrection? It means fuck all. Fuck all for a bodily resurrection.
Secondly, that his body was then interred in a tomb by a delegate of the Jewish Sanhedrin, whose name we have, Joseph of Arimathea.
Right.
This likewise is not a historical fact, because we don't have any direct evidence that Jesus was entombed. Our earliest evidence that talks about Jesus' burial doesn't mention a tomb. That would be Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. Given that, it seems highly unlikely that Jesus would have been entombed. And the common practice at the time was actually to throw people that were crucified into mass graves. Now, is it possible that Jesus was treated specially? Sure. It's possible, but that doesn't mean that it's probable. And that's actually a fallacy, the possible, therefore probable fallacy. Just because something's possible doesn't mean, therefore, that it's the most likely answer. The most likely answer in the situation is mass grave. Of course, that doesn't work for the apologist case for the resurrection of Jesus. Being thrown in a mass grave and then supposedly being seen later is far less parsimonious with the gospel accounts, which is where they get Joseph of Arimathea, who's most likely a fictional character that was invented for the specific purpose of entombing Jesus in the story. For one thing, Joseph, being a very common name at the time, also intricately linked with Jesus, as well as the Messiah in general. And then you have Arimathea, which can be translated into best disciple town. So it makes it really seem like this Joseph of Arimathea was just not a real person at all. So we got two facts, supposedly, that are not facts. They're flaccid facts. I make myself giggle with that every time. So these two flaccid facts are not facts at all. They're really weak inferences, and one of them is based on the gospel accounts, which are not reliable whatsoever. So he's 2 down, 3 to go. Let's see if he can bring something new.
That tomb was then discovered empty on the first day of the week by a group of Jesus' female disciples.
So, of course, the group of women finding the tomb is different in every single gospel story. And also, this is not a historical fact, the women finding the tomb empty. This was invented with the gospel narratives. And the gospel narratives even pile on more and more things when the women find the tomb empty, showing how it changed over time. Because it started from the women running away from the tomb, like, scared and shit, not telling a soul. And then by the end of it, you have like, magical shit happening. I believe Matthew has an angel descending from above, bitch slapping the stone away, and then saying, "He's not here, bitches. Get fucking wrecked. Go to somewhere and say something. He'll meet you there or something. Don't be mid." So I don't know if he's counting that as a separate fact or if it's tacked on with the Joseph of Arimathea thing. I don't know. It's either 2 or 3 flaccid facts at this point.
That thereafter, the various individuals and groups experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death.
This is also not a fact, a historical fact, because what we have records of is visions of Jesus, not like full on like bodily appearances, like he's just walking around the city center or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about are visions of Jesus, visions of this supposedly dead Messiah appearing to Paul, Peter, James, John, all of them. And so they're visions. They're not like actual bodily appearances. Now, he's getting the bodily appearances from the gospel stories. The scholarship has well established that the gospels are not reliable historical accounts. They're not trying to be history at all, even though Luke feigns trying to look like a history. He's not actually doing what historians do. And the content of the gospels, all of them are so laden with rhetorical and theological devices and different writing concepts and shit, like foil characters and all this other stuff, that there's no way to determine what is actually historical in any of the gospels. And because we can't determine fact from fiction in the gospels, that makes them historically useless to us. So to say that, oh, well, Jesus bodily appeared to people afterwards because in the gospels it says this, and that, that's not evidence. Historically, all of that is useless to us. So that's flaccid fact number 4. What's the last one?
And finally, that the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead despite having every predisposition to the contrary.
Woo! Whoop-de-fucking-do. Like, we'll get to the second part of a sentence there, but just because some people were convinced of the faith afterwards doesn't mean that Jesus actually bodily resurrected. That's just an illogical statement to make. And then Craig said that they had every predisposition not to believe in the faith, and I would love for him to enumerate these predispositions, because from what I can tell of the background information about Judaism, as well as the theology that the Gospels present, as well as the theology that Paul presents, it seems like they had every single fucking reason to believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead. The Jewish people were prepped for this exact kind of theology since the writing of Ezekiel back in the Old Testament times. That's when the syncretism of Judaism with multiple mystery religions started. And it had so much time to develop in theology and everything, and to prep the Jewish people for this Messiah to be a suffering and dying, resurrecting Messiah, that I don't understand how you can say that they weren't predisposed. I mean, obviously the group that includes Paul and Peter and James and the group of Jews that eventually became Christians were definitely exposed to this entire theology prior to it supposedly happening. And it was something that they would accept. Later Jews even developed the same kind of interpretation of the suffering servant from Isaiah 52 and 53. So it kind of seems like the Jewish theology was definitely expecting the exact kind of Messiah that they ended up getting in the first century. And this can be true whether there was a real guy walking around or not. The fact is that these 5 flaccid facts don't actually prove that Jesus bodily resurrected. You could say that it does prove that there were a group of Jews that followed some dude that ended up getting crucified, if you allow some ad hoc assumptions. And then after that dude died, they started having visions, and then this organized religion popped up and people started believing in it. That's the most that you can say about it. You can't say that Jesus actually bodily resurrected or any of that shit. All you can say is, oops, a religion fucking started because they got confused about visions. Which is an interesting point here that maybe I should have brought up earlier, but these visions that were experienced by the Jews and actually in the wider Roman Empire, they were thought to come directly from the gods. Even people outside of Judaism thought that visions that were given to people were messages directly from whatever god that they thought it was from. And so the Jews, being in that culture, would have thought the exact same thing. That's why they didn't associate like visions that, we would normally say are hallucinations now. They wouldn't associate them with mental illness or anything like that. They would have treated them special. These people would have gravitated towards these types of religions and cults that would readily accept them. So it seems like all of the evidence points away from a bodily resurrection and towards just a religion started, which is not all that fantastic of a claim. Yeah, a fucking religion started. Big whoop-de-fucking-do.
Now, in support of each of those 5 facts, there are multiple lines of evidence that I lay out in the book, so that the vast majority of New Testament historians today are convinced that those are factual, historical.
Yeah.
Well, like I said before, that may be true. It may be true that New Testament historians, or even historians in general, would agree to those facts. But even if we give him all of those facts as historical facts, that still does not mean that Jesus resurrected from the dead.
The question then is, how do you best explain them? And here various hypotheses have been proposed. The conspiracy hypothesis, the hallucination hypothesis, the wrong tomb hypothesis, and what I call the resurrection hypothesis.
Yes, and all of those explanations that come before magical Jew resurrection, however unlikely they are vastly more likely than magical Jew resurrection. Now, myself, I go with the hallucination hypothesis, I guess, being that the followers of Jesus, if he were to have existed, started hallucinating him after his death and then started a religion. That's parsimonious with the evidence that we have. It explains everything naturally using natural explanations. So I don't see the need for throwing a magical top hat on it and claiming some magical shit. That just doesn't make sense. We don't need the magic shit if we've got natural explanations.
That God raised him from the dead. And I think that when you assess these alternative historical hypotheses using the standard criteria for weighing historical explanations.
So Craig is about to get into what he thinks is the standard historical method. But I just want to interrupt real quick and say that in Christian apologetics or Christian scholarship, there's no standard historical method. It's all fragmented. And this is a well-documented phenomena in biblical and New Testament studies. There have been multiple scholarly surveys of New Testament biblical studies that show that the lack of a standardized historical method is causing a lot of problems for the field. And so I feel like whatever Craig is going to bring up here as far as what he thinks is the standard historical method is probably going to be full of flaws.
Like explanatory power, explanatory scope, plausibility, degree of ad hocness, or artificiality, and so forth.
While I do agree that those things are integral to a historical method, just saying those things doesn't give you the historical method. Like, you could say, oh, explanatory power, that's how we're doing it. But explanatory power is going to be subjective for each person. You have to develop a methodology for actually substantiating explanatory power. And you got to develop a methodology for each one of those things that he listed. So basically, he's just listing off the 4 things, the 4 aspects of historical methodology that your method has to fulfill, has to provide you with in order to get you to the best explanation. So it seems like Craig so far is not giving us the methodology. He's just giving us, oh, these are the aspects of it. Oh, okay. Well, how are you determining explanatory power? How are you determining any of the other things that he listed? That's what we want to know.
That the resurrection hypothesis emerges head and shoulders above any of these naturalistic alternatives, and that therefore by far the best explanation of the evidence is the one that these original disciples gave.
Well, see, I don't understand how it can really be head and shoulders above all the rest, because the resurrection hypothesis requires a lot of ad hoc assumptions. Not only the ad hoc assumptions that I've mentioned here, but one major ad hoc assumption is that the God of the Bible exists. That's one thing that I believe Michael Licona has even said in some debates.
Same thing with raising from the dead by natural causes, implausible. But if God exists and wants to raise Jesus, all bets are off. That's a game changer.
But you understand how just on the ad hoc criteria or the ad hoc aspect of his explanation, resurrection violates it. Also, explanatory power, the resurrection hypothesis just causes way more questions than it gives answers to. Like, How in the fuck did he resurrect? Oh, fucking magic? Well, let's just draw a cloud around that, write magic in it, and we've solved the problem. It doesn't actually solve the problem because we don't know how magic even fucking works. We can't describe magic because magic doesn't fucking exist as far as we can tell. And then, of course, there's plausibility, which is one of the aspects that he listed. And resurrection is the least plausible because it's a miracle. Miracles are going to be the least plausible explanation because miracles are not things that happen regularly in nature. These are things that are specifically done because an intelligent designer decided to do something or whatever in the fuck. So magical explanations are going to be the least plausible of all competing explanations that we can come up with. And then there's explanatory scope. I guess I could give him explanatory scope just because I feel like Christianity has the explanatory scope to explain that, but that's one out of the 4 aspects that he gave. And to be honest, explanatory scope isn't all that impressive.
Yeah.
God raised him from the dead.
Wow. So all of the 5 facts are historically attested, and many of them not just in the Bible or by the scriptures. It's attested, these facts are attested by other historical ancient sources that coincide with the scriptural attestations of Jesus, these events of his death and burial and resurrection.
Actually, all of these quote-unquote external accounts are based on the Gospels. Name me one in the comments section and I'll tell you how it's based on the Gospels. Tacitus, definitely based on the Gospels in some kind of fashion, either indirectly or directly. Pliny the Younger, he was interrogating Christians, so that's not evidence either. What else you got? Because I'm all open to hear about the external evidence that points towards it, but to me, from a critical examination of the external evidence, it really seems like they're all just based off of what Christians believed, which would have been what the Gospels said.
And the point Dr. Craig makes so profoundly is that if all these 5 things are historically attested, then they must be explained. And the hallucination theory you didn't mention, but that's my favorite explanation, sort of ridiculous explanation of folks that really get backed into a corner with those 5 facts.
No, we're not backed into a corner. I mean, especially when we have Paul that literally says he received visions, which would be hallucinations. I mean, even in Acts, which isn't historically reliable, it's most likely historical fiction. But what I'm saying is that even in Acts, which is representative of the Christian community, it says that Paul saw Jesus, experienced a bright light on the road to Damascus. Nobody else experienced it. What does that sound like to you? Does it sound like some kind of like bodily appearance, or does it sound like a hallucination? Now, in Paul's actual letters directly from Paul, or at least the man we know of as Paul, he says that he only gets information about Jesus from scripture and by revelation directly from Jesus. The revelation directly from Jesus after his death, after he's ascended into heaven, would have been a vision or hallucination. People now get hallucinations about Jesus or other religious figures. So this seems to be like a natural explanation. Natural explanations are always going to trump magical Jew resurrection. So I don't understand why this guy thinks that hallucination is the explanation we go to when we're backed up into a corner. It seems like the most reasonable explanation. It seems the most parsimonious with the evidence that we have without having to invoke fucking magic.
Because Jesus really died on a Roman cross.
Yeah, these naturalistic explanations are so bad.
They're so bad.
That you will typically find that those who do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus don't propound any of these naturalistic alternatives.
I would love a citation on this. What I've gotten in the past as far as seeing citations about people not proposing these naturalistic explanations or whatnot has just been people saying, oh, well, yeah, all this happened, and so we can't say exactly what happened, but they seem to leave out the, most likely explanations for things or anything of that nature. Also, this kind of has the connotation that unless you can explain exactly what happened, like unless you have 100% knowledge that this is the answer, then the only other answer is God. Like God resurrected him. God did it. Magical Jew resurrection's the only alternative to just, I don't know what happened, but I can be assured that it's not fucking magic. Apparently that option just doesn't even fucking exist to apologists like William Lane Craig here. But also, I feel like it's a common apologist tactic to laugh off opposition and just say, oh, it's so bad. So bad. Without actually explaining why it's bad. Explain why the hallucination hypothesis is a bad hypothesis. To me, it seems like hallucinations happen. They happen now. They've happened all throughout time. It's just something that happens to humans. It's part of the human condition for people to sometimes have hallucinations. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has hallucinations, but I'm just saying that because of our physiology, because of how our brains work, that's just some shit that happens on occasion. And we have natural explanations through neuroscience and chemistry, biology, and all that kind of shit to explain why hallucinations happen. So given that these are naturalistic explanations that don't require magic, that are proven time and time again to just happen in reality instead of needing some intelligent being in order to cause them to happen, it seems like no matter what you say, it's still going to be the better explanation. But more to the point, all of the naturalistic explanations are far more likely than magic, which is essentially what William Lane Craig is saying here, is that, these natural explanations that don't require all my ad hoc bullshit can't explain shit like my magical fucking bubble does.
Instead, they just remain agnostic.
Yeah.
They just say, something incredible happened that Easter morning, and we don't know what it is.
Right.
And so they simply have no explanation.
Yeah.
So saying I don't know or remaining agnostic about the exact explanation of the supposed resurrection of Jesus is perfectly fine. I don't fault anybody for remaining agnostic on it and not wanting to, sort of tie yourself to one explanation or over another. But I believe that most reasonable people would agree that a naturalistic explanation is far more likely, has far more explanatory power, is least ad hoc, has explanatory scope and all that other kind of shit, versus magic, which is essentially what Craig is arguing for here. Magic. He's saying magic is more likely than natural shit that happens. And when you boil it down to that dichotomy there, I feel like you can easily see why people are not convinced by it. I mean, we're not convinced by magicians at a magic show. We all know that it's an illusion. Well, except for maybe little kids, but parents tell them afterwards, it's not real. He didn't really make a boat disappear. Don't worry. Also, Dumbo's okay. He didn't really disappear. That kind of shit. So, I mean, when you boil it down to magic versus natural shit, I feel like you can see why skeptics are just not convinced by the bullshit reasons that he sort of links together and says, aha, I built a resurrection, when he really hasn't. So, I'm not convinced, and I don't think that anybody should be convinced by these horribly flaccid facts. If you will, please go down below in the comments. Let me know what you thought about his facts. Do you think that they actually prove a bodily resurrection? Or do you think that he needs to go back to the drawing board, rework some of this shit, and try to find something better to argue with? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.